Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 275 or 275. We have 24 episodes until 300. That's a big number. I'm your host, Jono Logan, and I'm still in the middle of unpacking and getting things set up in my new apartment. The last few days have been relatively stressful. We had big plans when we moved in. Big plans. We bought a ton of IKEA stuff, and we were going to get wall mountings, and we were going to get shelves, and I got this really great shelf for my office. It was going to be it was perfect height and everything. And then we discovered that we live in a concrete box. And by that, I mean literally behind every piece of drywall is a layer of concrete, it seems. And it's absolutely impossible to actually hang anything in this apartment. So now I just have walls with holes in them and no use for them. So I did a massive return to IKEA today. The poor gentleman at the IKEA return desk looked like he was about to cry. I just came up with so many boxes. But yeah, so moving stress, getting into a new apartment, that's kind of thing. That just happens. But you know what? I'm taking a break from that stress tonight to talk about some outstanding RPGs that have recently come out. So joining us today are Ben Love.
Hi.
And we also have our favorite wrestling fan here at RPG Fan, Neal the Bitter Gourd. Oh, hey, here he comes right now. He's coming along. Oh, hey, so Bitter Gourd, you're here to review WrestleQuest. Is that right?
That's right. I'm here to chew the celery about WrestleQuest. Yeah, I know the expression is chew the fat, but the Bitter Gourd does not chew disgusting animal fat. That side of bacon is a main course of colorectal disease for the rest of your life.
Wow, it sounds like you have a real beef with meat.
Damn right I do. Meat is murder. So when these cow-consuming meatheads step into the ring with Bitter Gourd, it's capital punishment time.
Well, it's interesting because all of your opponents say that you're easy pickings because you don't get enough protein in your diet. They say that you're weak.
Vegans? Weak? Yeah, tell that to the mighty elephant, the rhinoceros, the bison, and Bitter Gourd as we charge all of you at full speed. We will gore, trample, and flatten you.
So Neal, it sounds like you're enjoying WrestleQuest.
Indeed I am. It's been one of the best games I've played all year, actually.
Okay, first off, that was fantastic. Thank you for doing that incredibly silly wrestling homage. But also, your Bitter Gourd voice sounds exactly like a character from the 1980s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Bitter Gourd actually sounds like it might be one of the Turtles' villains.
Well, listen, I mean, with pro wrestling, you got to go over the top with it,
Oh, you really do, yeah. And it's interesting because this game, WrestleQuest, so I'll explain a little bit. So WrestleQuest was an interesting title that pulls a lot of inspiration from the WWF. Now, I know it's now WWE because WWF, they had to change their name a few years ago. But back when I was a kid, it was called the WWF. And it pulls its inspiration from, like the Turtles, actually, a lot of 80s, it was a very 80s time. And this game pulls from that era. It was supposed to come out in the summer of 2022. It was delayed to May 2023, and then it was pushed to August. It's finally coming out. It's a classic turn-based RPG with pixel graphics that just happens to feature some of the greatest wrestlers of all time. So, Neal, before we get into actual gameplay and stuff, would you say that WrestleQuest successfully pays homage to the golden age of wrestling?
100%. And not just to the wrestling itself, but just to that whole experience of that 80s childhood when it was all about, your TV was centered around either cartoons or pro wrestling. And sometimes we would spend hours in your room just upturning the toy box and having your Transformers and your He-Man characters do fake wrestling matches, using your Monopoly board as a makeshift wrestling ring because the real wrestling ring playset was really expensive. And
it was. I remember when I was a kid, one of my friends had one, and we had wrestling action figures, and we'd use the playset, and it was awesome. You and I both grew up in we were children of the 1980s. Ben, how old are you?
So I actually turned 30 in a week, so.
Okay, so you can go sit on the kids' table. while Neal and I indulge in our 1980s nostalgia. Okay. Well, Neal, so WrestleQuest, it's, obviously the style of the game, the look of it, everything like that is based around wrestling, especially the golden age of wrestling. But it's also a pretty traditional turn-based RPG. Can you tell us more about, like, in turn-based RPGs, the plot is, very, very important. Can you tell us more about WrestleQuest's plot? Like, who's the main character?
Okay. WrestleQuest's plot is a lot more epic than I was expecting. In fact, there are two main protagonists. We have one guy, Randy Santos, who's an aspiring pro wrestler, practically lives at the wrestling gym he trains at, and just wants to be a superstar, the totally honest way. And the whole thing is, all right, can he achieve superstardom without, sacrificing his values and morals and everything he holds dear? And then we're introduced to our second protagonist, guy named Brink Logan, who even though he's one of the most skilled wrestlers in the biz, he basically has to be a jobber at his family's wrestling promotion. And he's just sick and tired of constantly having to put over, like, more marketable wrestlers who are ultimately worse than him. But what I like about Brink is he understands his role as a jobber. He does it with the utmost professionalism, and because he knows he's representing his family as well. So then it's like, wow, can Brink Logan achieve the respect he deserves without losing his heart?
Well, I, for one, am cheering heavily for Brink Logan. Every single family reunion, that guy just goes on and on about how there's no respect. Well, it's interesting that it's like that. First off, Randy Santos sounds like a wrestler. Like, that just sounds like the name of a wrestler from the 1980s. Actually, Brink Logan does too. That probably would have been my favorite for obvious reasons. So that's the main. Those are the main characters of the game. So how does the world of wrestling, how is it incorporated into the gameplay and the narrative?
The world of WrestleQuest, it's like we were saying before, the idea of the upturned toy box where any of your toys could be a wrestler. Like, your little plushie could be a wrestler. Your Monopoly board could be a wrestling ring. That's the inspiration behind WrestleQuest's world. It's that whole idea of the childhood imagination. And different places, utilize different, like, kind of toy-like graphics and things like that to represent different, like, areas where, for example, there's one town where it's has mostly, like, boxes and broken toys. It's an industrial town that likes hardcore wrestling. There's another town that is more into, like, the lucha libre style wrestling with, piñata type toys and things everywhere.
I really like that. I like the idea that they're not just paying homage to the 1980s WWF era of wrestling. They're paying homage to wrestling as a whole, like, across the world. That's really cool.
And and the idea that the characters, even though they are toys and the whole concept feels like, when you were a kid, just having, like, your Optimus Prime toy wrestle with your Skeletor toy, it also just feels like a surprisingly cohesive world. And and storyline is surprisingly epic because while the narrative switches often between Randy and Brink, there are times when some of the side characters actually get point of view chapters, and I'm like, I was not expecting a WrestleQuest to, remind me of, like, Final Fantasy VI, where, you would sometimes switch perspectives from different party members elsewhere in the world.
That's really interesting to me. I mean, that was sort of the central concept behind, well, Smash Brothers, most famously, the idea of, all the toys in the toy box. But the fact that they've done this as an RPG is really interesting, especially considering, like you said, there are a variety of different worlds. How does the world map work? Is it like is it a Final Fantasy style world map, or are there like specific regions that you go to? Basically, is it more like Final Fantasy, or is it more like, I don't know, Secret of Mana, for example?
The world map is a lot like Chrono Trigger's.
Okay.
Because go figure. I just mentioned Final Fantasy VI. We just mentioned Chrono Trigger, and I'm going to mention Super Mario RPG as well, because a lot of the like timed button press and twitch elements and mini games are heavily inspired by that, which is awesome because the developers, not only are they like super fans of pro wrestling, they're clearly super fans of those classic 16-bit Square RPGs, because I felt some of my favorite elements from, say, Super Mario RPG, Final Fantasy VI, and Chrono Trigger in WrestleQuest.
Pulling from Mario RPG style turn-based combat with action gameplay, that seems really, really smart to create a much more dynamic system than would be in, say, like a classic turn-based RPG, which makes a lot of sense because it's wrestling. What's the turn-based combat system in WrestleQuest like? How does it work?
You get 4 different options. You can either do like your regular attack, a taunt, use an item, or use a gimmick, which is a special move. And with the regular attack, there's like a time button press to give it some extra power. And with the special moves, there's different timed button presses to execute them. There's also what's called tag team maneuvers, where you can like do a combined special attack with one of the other characters in the battle party, which have its own set of button presses. And taunting, although it lowers your defense, it increases what's called hype, which is how the audience is reacting to you. If any of you played Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, and you remember how those battles, you had Mario and his party like in front on a theater stage in front of a crowd, and like the crowd would like cheer or boo based on how Mario was fighting. It's similar in WrestleQuest. How much the audience is into the fight actually determines like what kind of rewards you might receive at the end of a battle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And there are actually some like major battles where there's a set list of, certain actions you might have to do to quote unquote win the battle, because winning is not always victory.
Oh, so what do you mean by that?
Like, for example, there might be a point where you have to take falls from opponents' moves to lower the audience hype, so that way they cheer more for the opponent because your character's trying to put them over, make them look good.
I see. Okay, that's interesting, because wrestling, when you boil it down, I know there's a lot of there's talk about wrestling being fake, which is kind of a silly concept. I mean, wrestling is scripted in many ways, but like clearly these people are doing remarkably athletic things in front of an audience for their entertainment. Like, it's a combination between athleticism and basically theater. It's kind of like the closest thing to real life superheroes that there are, in terms of the garish costumes, the personalities, that kind of thing. So the idea that they've incorporated the showmanship of it all into the game is a fascinating idea.
And there are even times before certain matches you can actually plan out your walkout. Like, as you progress through the game, you'll collect different entrance musics, and different like pyrotechnics and things and all kinds of things to make your entrance walkout look cool.
In terms of the actual, like we talked about the combat, how does character progression work in this game and the development of various, your skills, essentially, your wrestling abilities, I guess? Is it just a basic experience system or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much a basic experience system, but a lot of the terms are more wrestling terms. Like, for example, instead of like special attacks, it's called gimmicks. And because every character has their own unique like skill sets, they just learn new skills as they level up.
Okay, so I mean, if you played an RPG, a 16-bit RPG, it's very much inspired by those systems.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
What I like about it, I'd say WrestleQuest is almost a tradition with a twist, because while it takes very familiar elements of 16-bit RPGs that we know and love, it kind of looks at them a different way. Like we were saying earlier, victory does not always mean winning. There are some boss battles where not only do you have to lose, but you have to lose a certain way under certain conditions. Like, you have to, pin your opponent and let them break out of it. So having to kind of think less like a knight and a mage, just, kill everything as quickly as possible. I had to think of it more like a pro wrestler, where it's more about, it's part of the showmanship is part of it as well. Even if I'm losing a battle, it's not just an automatic scripted loss. I have to actively lose the right way.
That's a clever mechanic that they're playing with that idea. Okay, well, aside from the combat and the main story, it's an RPG. Let's talk side quests. So are there a lot of side quests in this game? Is there any way to develop, find extra items or abilities, that kind of thing through them? Like, what are the rewards?
Oh man, there's a lot of side content. There's side quests you can find by just randomly talking to people. There's side quests and side content you can find simply by just exploring the world map off the beaten path. And there's also a ton of Twitch-based mini games. Like, there's this one arcade game where you tap the arrows, similar to like a Dance Dance Revolution. There's another one where you're like guiding a car through like a demolition derby, and some of the rewards include maybe getting like legendary wrestlers as summons, maybe meeting a legendary wrestler and they bestow like one of their props to you as a legendary item that can really help you. There's also side quests that develop the world building.
Well, I wanted to ask about let's just talk about those legendary wrestlers that you mentioned. So some of the names that I recognize: Jake the Snake Roberts, Randy Macho Man Savage. These are famous wrestlers from the Golden Age, and they are showing up. So they are summons. Are they also characters in the game?
Several of them are, yes. I don't want to give spoilers, but yeah, one of the legendary wrestlers can potentially become one of the managers of one of the protagonist's parties.
I mean, they're probably not the only characters in the game. There were probably also, you have Brink and you have Randy, but are there other party members as well? Like, what's a good 16-bit RPG without a colorful cast of characters that you can command to beat your enemies with? Who else is in are there any other standout characters for you that are really interesting, that are just supporting characters?
Several, actually. One of the first characters Randy meets is this dude in there's this town called Boxwood. It's very rough and tumble town where Randy wants to start his wrestling journey, and he meets this guy named Toy Box Jimmy, who wrestling fan who jacks cars, and he actually has several point of view chapters later on, because while Randy is trying to, chase his dream outside of Boxwood, Toy Box Jimmy's like, nah, I want to stay here. I got to help rebuild the town. So just so he could take it apart again.
Yeah.
So it's like, while we get some bits of Randy off on his quest, some bits of Brink off on his quest, sometimes it goes back to Toy Box Jimmy doing crazy stuff in his town, and some of the most interesting events actually happened in his storyline. Like, there was some stuff completely out of left field that was happening, and I was just like, whoa! Again, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but if you were an 80s kid, you'll love it. You'll just love it.
Well, something that's getting me really excited about WrestleQuest instantly is the visual style of it. It's very colorful, loud. Like you said earlier, we were talking, it's like a toy box, but there are so many flamboyant colors in it, and the combination between that and the 2D style is really super. It's a super engaging visual style. Neal, what did you think of it?
I thought the game looked amazing, and as cool as the game looks in screenshots, it looks even better in motion. The animations for the characters, especially when they're doing those crazy wrestling moves, it's like they're toy-like, but also super smooth. And what I love is that the environments have a lot of like motion and moving bits to them too, so they really feel like they're like living and breathing places.
Interesting. Alongside of the graphics, how would you say I'd say one of the other important parts of it to create the atmosphere is the music. How's the music in the game?
Oh, sound design as a whole, I would say is, well, even better than the graphics, actually.
Really?
The soundtrack has several different genres. Like, there's rock to EDM, military marches, all kinds, because the music needs to be as varied and uniquely exciting as all the wrestlers and crazy characters in the game themselves.
Yeah.
And what's even cooler is the sound effects. I mean, and not just the obvious sound effects like the bell dinging after each battle, which they call a match.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like in wrestling, there's all kinds of fun voice clips throughout the game. And what I like is, depending on who's leading the party, some characters have different footstep sounds. And it's just, I thought that was just a really great subtle touch. It was like, wow, that extra care, like, really put into the sound design. Like, so yeah, graphics and sound, very impressive.
I am very glad to hear that. I think this might be a really good example of why games should be delayed if they're not ready yet. I understand totally that there are market demands on certain developers and that sort of thing. But if a game can be delayed a while because it's not ready yet, it can turn into something really special. And it sounds like that's sort of what happened here. I mean, a lot of people were really excited when it was announced, and they were quite disappointed when it got delayed. But personally, I think it sounds like they really did knock it out of the park. And that extra year they spent on it, it sounds like it was time well spent.
100%, because I'll tell you, I remember when I played the first demo, I didn't like it at all. It just felt really slow and really clunky, and then playing it now, it's like it just went to the gym and just gained like 50 pounds of pure muscle.
And that's what you got to do if you want to be a top wrestler.
Yeah. So yeah, the delays really helped the game go from something I wasn't really looking forward to one of my favorite games of 2023. So it all worked out in the end.
Well, we got the code a little late, so we don't have the review quite ready yet. It will be on RPG Fan when the review is done, and I probably will update the show notes with the review retroactively. But yeah, I am very happy to hear that you liked this game because it just looks really, really cool. And if you were a wrestling fan as a kid, especially, you are going to find, I imagine, a lot here that you're going to like.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I mean, a lot of my friends were into wrestling, and so I was into wrestling too. Because when you're a kid, you know, you kind of do what your friends want some of the time. So they would watch, you know, we'd have a sleepover, and they would watch WrestleMania or something like that on VHS, and I had a few action figures that were wrestlers and things like that. But the one that I really liked as a kid was a cage match. I always thought cage matches were cool, and sometimes there would be as many as 24 wrestlers in the ring, 24 killers in the ring. That is my extremely awkward way of transitioning to our second game of this episode. Thank you, Neal, for talking about WrestleQuest.
Yeah, thanks. That was super interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And now we're going to transition into 24 Killers, which is another RPG that might not be on people's radar. Okay, so this takes a little bit of explaining. Back in the very early PlayStation era, there was a company called Lovedelic, I believe, and they produced what were known as anti-RPGs, which kind of, I don't even want to say spoofed the conventions of RPGs, but so much it turned them on their head. The most famous of them, the most famous of them would probably be Moon. Remix RPG Adventure, which was in 1997, and this game was not localized until last year, when it was localized and brought over. Was it last year or a few years ago?
It was a couple years ago. I think it was 2021. Yeah,
it was 2020. No, it was 2020.
Oh,
well, that explains why I don't remember that. So yeah, an anti-RPG. It's a really interesting concept, and a game came out recently that sort of spun on a similar axis. It's very much like Moon. It's an anti-RPG, and that's 24 Killers. So Ben, you came to me with this game. It was not on my radar even slightly, and you were like, I'd like to review this. And I looked at it. I was like, this looks bizarre. Sure, go ahead. And I'm really glad that I did, because it turned into a really interesting review to read. So let's talk a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about 24 Killers and I guess the developer, Happy Shabby Games?
Yeah, so Happy Shabby Games is it's mostly a one-man project. I believe that the developer had a little help with like music and maybe some art and things like that, but mostly one person. And it's very inspired by Moon and then other games made by Lovedelic and then the studios that spun off from Lovedelic after they went under. So some of those studios would be like Punchline, who made Tulip, or I'm blanking on the name of the other studio, but
Gift
they made
I believe.
Yeah, they made Chibi Robo and Gifpia on the GameCube. Yeah, Skip. So, different creators from Lovedelic went and founded those different studios. And so 24 Killers kind of takes a little bit from each of those. I would say it's definitely the most influenced by Moon, but there's little bits of each of those games. So if you've played any of those games before, then I would definitely recommend 24 Killers for anybody who's liked any of those games. But if you're not familiar with those, then I would say that in terms of gameplay, you called it an anti-RPG because that was famously what Moon was called. And
yeah,
it's a little more like an adventure game, but it doesn't really play like a point and click adventure game. But that is more of like the mindset that you would be in when you're playing the game. So there's no combat. It's mostly walking around, dialogue, interacting with characters, picking up items, that sort of thing.
Ben, how would you describe an anti-RPG?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal when Lovedelic was developing Moon was to create something that subverts the genre expectations of a role-playing game. So the main way they did that was not having any combat. But there's some other ways of doing that too. Like having maybe like a more self-contained space or area in which you kind of go around and complete your quest, which is something that both Moon and 24 Killers share. So it's not a globe-trotting adventure, but you still have a lot of the like key elements that make role-playing games fun and engaging. So you get that kind of, the story, narrative, character interaction, and there's still stats. So there are stats to manage in 24 Killers. Not very many, but there are a few. So you have your luck stat is one, and that affects different things in the game. And then you also have your stamina. And so the game is mostly based around stamina. It has like a day system. So each day you have, your stamina bar, and then when it runs out, you have to go home and go to sleep. And if you don't make it home, then you'll pass out, and one of the characters on the island will take away your money. So there's a little bit of like, there is a consequence for failure, and you have to manage your time and everything. But yeah, so I think the core of like an anti-RPG is, subverting some of the genre tropes, but still retaining those base elements that make role-playing games fun.
I'm just going to say, can you just explain the plot of this? Because I read your plot description here, and it's very well written, and I had no idea what I read by the end of it. The plot of this game is interesting.
Yeah, so the game is very surreal. And there are some elements of it that are more grounded in reality, but most of it's very high concept. And it might be a little bit hard to wrap your head around when just reading, my description of it in the review. But it basically, the setup is that you are home, and that's your name, and you're a creature who, you're like an interdimensional being, and you have, not omnipotent, you're not omnipotent. You don't have like absolute powers, but you have, a large amount of abilities to move between dimensions and that sort of thing. But because you're such this higher order being, you've thought of yourself as better than other living creatures, and kind of isolated yourself in kind of the ether between dimensions. And Moon is this alien creature who is kind of running the show for things on the island. And she basically captures you and puts you inside of the body of a dead soldier on this island, and basically forces you to do her bidding, to kind of teach you a lesson. And so that's the core setup of the game. And the island that the game takes place on is an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean that had a military base on it. So that's why there's a dead soldier's body that you can inhabit. And that kind of plays into the aesthetics of the island and the roles that the different characters play on the island too.
Sorry, when you read that, it just sounds like a vague parody of Animal Crossing, where Moon is Tom Nook. If Tom Nook was was an alien and could curse you into an undead body.
Yeah, honestly, Animal Crossing, there are some similarities between this game and Animal Crossing, because you do have like you're on a small area, and there's lots of different characters with different personalities that you interact with and do little tasks for. So that is actually a really good comparison point.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about how anti-RPGs work. How does this one work? So what's the central gameplay mechanic of this?
Yeah, so the central gameplay mechanic in this is that basically, as part of your, let's say penance that you're doing on this island for Moon, she's very into scrapbooking. And there's all these little monsters that live on this island. And your task is they live inside of a missile silo in the center of the island. And each day you can bring up the missile silo and then let one of them out. And when you do that, they've been cooped up in the missile silo for a long time. So they they want to stretch their legs. They want you to do something for them. So each time you let a monster out, they will they'll want you to do different tasks for them. And on the completion of that task, you get to take a picture of them for Moon's scrapbook. And as part of that process, once you take a picture of the creature after you formed a bond with them and give it back to Moon, then you can actually take on the abilities of that monster to use in your journey or in adventures on the island. So there's about 8 different types of monster, and those determine what abilities that you can get from them. And then there's like 4 monsters within each of the 8 kind of groups, and they will give you higher levels of that ability. So the main gameplay involves going around, freeing the monsters from the silo, doing little tasks for them, using the abilities that you've gained from other monsters. And then there are some different events that will happen on the island too. And so as part of that, you're also investigating the larger mystery of the island, the backstory of these characters, and kind of learning about home as well.
What are some of the abilities that home can get? Like, what are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so some of the interesting ones, there's these cat-like creatures, and they can run really fast. So you can use those abilities to get through, there's some puzzles that involve, running really fast. But in order to do that, you actually have to run through these rings that appear when you start running in using that ability. And then as you pass through the rings, you maintain your speed. And then if you fail to get through the ring in time, then your speed decreases. So there's some really interesting puzzles and little tasks and you can do using that one. There's also an ability where you, this comes from the ghost-like monsters, you can actually create a copy of yourself and then leave it in an area and then go and do something. So often you'll have to make a copy of yourself and put it on a switch and then use that to open a door and then go through really quick. And then, switch into a different ability or whatever. So, and like I said, there's a bunch of them. So, we don't have to go through all of them here, obviously, but, there's a lot of different things you can do, and they combine them in really interesting ways in the game as well.
I think based on what I've read, I've never played Moon. We talked about it on Random a while ago. But I feel like one of the hallmarks of the genre of anti-RPGs is a vaguely surrealistic sense of style and narrative. So how does the game's writing contribute to its overall atmosphere? And I understand there's some fourth wall breaking included as well.
Yes. So the writing is very quirky, and it's not... I'm currently playing Disco Elysium for Retro Encounter right now, and that's a game that's
I really need to play
excellent,
it.
But very wordy, right? Like tons and tons of text. And this game is almost the opposite. Like even though the dialogue interacting with characters is like the meat of the game, I would say the most lines are really relatively brief, and usually the monsters will only have like a few things to say. But the amount of personality and humor that they pack into those lines is really interesting. And, they can run from being like goofy toilet humor to being like really existential, like angst. So, that is like a really big part of, I think, that surreal feeling is that you'll be talking to a character and they'll say something really goofy, and then you'll go and talk to another character and they're talking about like what the meaning of existence is, and you'll stumble upon some like interdimensional mystery, and that's part of what makes the game so intriguing and makes you want to see what's going to happen next.
So the character interactions, who are some of the main characters of the game, and how are they developed throughout it?
Yeah, so you have
you obviously have Home, and you have
Home,
Moon.
right? Who's the character that you play as, and then Moon, who's the alien creature who's kind of masterminding things on the island.
The Tom Nook.
And then you have a bunch of other characters. So there's a character named Regular, who is like so there's like when you're on the island, there's at one point where a cruise ship passes by, and then somebody gets kicked off of the cruise ship, and then a few days later, they wash up on shore of the island, and that's Regular. And they're a human being, which is different because most of the characters on the island are like different monsters or creatures. And they end up setting up shop on the island. So one of the key mechanics is you can collect these things called whispers. And whispers are like these little rocks that have like a human eye in the center of them. And they serve as the game's currency, but they're also like the source of all the magic and kind of surreal things that happen on the island. So like a lot of times, a lot of whispers will congregate, and then, something interesting will happen, or something in the environment will change. But you can collect them as you explore the island, and then you can go to Regular and then buy different little items. And it's not always clear what the item is going to do. The descriptions are pretty vague for the items, but usually, if you think about it for a minute, you'll find a use for them, and they'll help you progress in the game or interact with the character in a certain way. There's also a character named Johnny Puzzle, who is
sorry, this is a great name.
Yeah. He has a human body, but a dog's head. And he's called Johnny Puzzle because he likes to create puzzles. Like that's his, hobby. And he's kind of like a tortured artist personality. So he feels that he's very misunderstood, and that like making the puzzles is his art form. And he's always like very kind of gruff and fed up with people on the island because they don't understand him and like the artistic value of his puzzles. And there is a point in the game where you actually have to go into the volcano in the middle of the island, and that's where he's set up basically like a puzzle dungeon. So you have to solve a bunch of puzzles in a row, and then there'll be boss fights at the end of it, and they utilize your monster abilities that you've acquired.
Yeah, it just sounds like a bitter, angry escape room designer.
Yes, that's a perfect description of him. Yeah. And there's so many different little interesting characters like that. All the monsters, they don't have as much depth to them as some of the characters I've mentioned, just because there's so many of them, but they each have their own little personality quirks. And one interesting thing is, there's another shop on the island run by a talking dumpster named Recycler. And you can buy, after you progress a little bit in the game, she sets up like a gachapon where you can get the little capsules. And at first it seems like this is completely like useless. Like why do you need to like buy those and get them? What happens is when you open the capsule, there'll be like furniture or an accessory to decorate your house that you go in to sleep in every night. And they don't seem to serve any purpose, but actually they unlock like hangout events with the different creatures on the island. So there's a piece of furniture or decoration that corresponds to every single creature that you will meet on the island. And if you have it in your house, they'll ask to come over to your house to hang out, and then you can have like more dialogue with them, and they may give you some of their backstory or say something funny or tell you a bit more about the world. So if you do decide to pick up the game and play it, definitely don't neglect those.
It sounds a little bit like some of the mechanics that you'd find in Stardew Valley or something like that.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And that's a big theme with the game too, is that because home was so isolated from other living beings, basically the task that Moon sets you on is to make friends with all of these creatures and do little tasks for them and gain their trust. And throughout that process, home becomes more friendly and less standoffish, and you really see a character development over the period of the game. And, I think that theme of like connection and forming bonds with people is really what the game is all about.
I think the thing that's going to draw most people to the game is the visual style, because it has a very, very unique visual style that looks a little bit, if you've seen Moon, it looks a little bit inspired by it, but different. Tell me what you think of the visual style. Like, how does it impact the game?
Yeah, so the best way I would describe the visual style is it's kind of using like pre-rendered sprites like you would see on the Super Nintendo sometimes. So like Super Mario RPG or Donkey Kong Country, it's kind of that style of like a pre-rendered sprite that's made from like a 3D model. And it also gives it almost like a claymation kind of type appearance.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to describe, but it's very striking when you see it. And then the backgrounds are all like that kind of pre-rendered background style that was common on the PlayStation 1. And it's, the setting is very, because it's like a tropical deserted island setting. You do have like a lot of like saturated colors and, but there is like a lot of actual variety on the island too, with different kinds of environments and different settings that you can go into. And then the creature designs are like all over the place. I mean, you've got I was describing what Johnny Puzzle's like, but you've also got more human looking creatures. You got like there's one that's like a giant like lobster. And there's one that's like a worm, and those two creatures are part of the same group where they all have like military gear on. So they'll be like wearing like a military cap or like a military jacket, but then it's just like an animal. It's kind of interesting. So you have like a really unique visual style. It looks a little bit like Moon. You can definitely see the inspiration, but it's very unique and definitely not like you won't look at it and be like, oh, this is like, copying, this thing or super inspired by something else. It has a very distinct look to it.
Yeah. Neal, have you any interest in playing this game? It seems like something that would be very much up your alley, actually.
You know what? I would. I'm one of those people. I've never played Moon either, but I am interested in playing it simply because it takes something we know and then subverts it in a very unique way. And I'm definitely interested to play 24 Killers. I'll be honest, when I first saw the review of the game, I initially thought it was like a rare like retro title that flew completely under the radar, like maybe 20, 25 years ago, or maybe a lost Love Delic concept. So when I was like, saw that it came out this year, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, it nails that aesthetic. It really feels like it just dropped out of like the late 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, I really like how a common thread between 24 Killers and WrestleQuest is that thrill of what kind of wacky, quirky character am I going to meet next? Because that's how I felt playing WrestleQuest. What kind of wacky, crazy character, are Randy and Brink gonna meet next?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge part of the appeal of 24 Killers is just like meeting all the different creatures and interacting with them, and like just you'll never guess like what the next one's going to look like or what kind of thing they're going to say. And I think it's just super fun to always be constantly surprised like that.
I think that one of the reasons why a lot of games like this are made nowadays is because people did grow up. People who have grown up in the 90s have finally reached the stage of their lives where they have the ability to make what they want. So we do see homages to classic games. And I mean, in terms of Moon and the other games of that developer, they're very, very, very niche, but they are beloved. So the fact that people are starting to make some of these anti-RPGs again is a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it's kind of like how it felt like, every indie developer who's making like an RPG was really inspired by Earthbound for a long time. And like, I think that game was really impactful for people, and it's led to a lot of interesting and unique games that really feel nothing like Earthbound, like Undertale or some other games that we've gotten. And it's interesting to see people to have their own take on some games that are maybe a little bit less well known, especially in like the West. And I think people are much more able with the internet now to see a lot of these old games and experience a lot of these old games that we kind of missed out on. And so to get a lot of these indie games that are inspired by those classics, but also do something really new and interesting with it. It just makes me really excited to, pay attention to some of the smaller under the radar games that we get.
Yeah. And this looks like, I'm really glad that you brought this, because hopefully we get a little bit more attention on it, because it looks just like a really cool game.
Yeah, it's super great. I was super surprised by it when I played it, how much I loved it. And I think if anybody who likes adventure games, if you have played Tulip or Chibi Robo or any of those games, definitely give this a try, because it's funny and it's cute and it doesn't overstay its welcome either. It took me about like 8 hours to finish it. So, and it's very replayable too. Actually, that's one really interesting thing about it is when you start the game and you go to pick a save file, each save file like has a different little modifier attached to it. And when you finish the game with that save file, you can actually carry that modifier over into your next playthrough. And then it'll change things about the world or the characters.
Ooh, neat. So a little bit extra replay value there, which is something that a lot of RPGs don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so short that, it doesn't feel like a slog to go back and revisit it.
Well, like I was saying about childhood nostalgia, and, a lot of these games are reflections of the childhood nostalgia of their developers. I was thinking about WrestleQuest. We're moving on to the discussion question, by the way. I was thinking about WrestleQuest and wrestling. And like I said earlier, a lot of my friends were very into wrestling. And I was into it because they were into it. It was like it wasn't something that I would have gotten into by myself. And then once they lost interest, I instantly lost interest, because it wasn't something that I was really into by myself. But I was thinking about that, and I just thought an interesting discussion question would be, what is something that you were really into as a kid that you are not into at all as an adult? Like something that you just lost all interest in. And it was like something you were super passionate about when you were like under the age of 10. And now it's just like, whatever, don't care.
Okay, I've got one. So I think for me, that would be anime. So I used to be, super into watching anime. Like every day after school when Toonami was on, I would rush home and watch it every day. And, up until probably like when through undergrad, like I'd keep up with each new anime season and like watch all the new shows. And just over time, I've kind of fallen out of it. Like there's a bunch of like anime from that I grew up with and that I still really love and we'll go back and revisit. But I mean, I don't know the last time I watched like a new season of anime. It's gotta be like a new show. It's like probably 5 years or so since I've actually kept up with what's current. It's just, and I don't know if it's really things in the industry have changed and the kind of shows they're making now changed, or my own, interest in it has just wavered. But I think that would be it for me.
For me, it is hockey cards. When I was a kid, I still do technically have a massive hockey card collection, and I was super into it. Like my father is very sports. I was a baseball player for years and a hockey player, an incredible hockey player. And he he loved hockey cards, and because he loved hockey cards, he would buy me hockey cards as a small child. And I would get them, I would collect them, I would put them in the thing, I would trade them with friends. Really into hockey cards. And some other cards as well on the periphery, because there would be other sets out there. You'd see like a set of baseball cards beside the hockey cards, and you'd be like, yeah, I'll give that a try. And then I just lost all interest in it, and I have absolutely no interest in hockey cards. Incidentally, I didn't have any interest in hockey. It was the cards, it was the collectible aspect of it that interested me. So I think once I got a little bit older and I started developing my own taste, that collecting instinct, which I still have, was diverted into areas that were more me. For example, comic books. I don't have them here. They're in Nova Scotia. I don't know where I put them here, but I have a very, very extensive comic book collection. Like I have a complete run of the second volume of What If, and lots of other series as well. And I loved collecting them. It wasn't just a matter of reading them, it was a matter of collecting them. So yeah, I feel like hockey cards were a transitional thing for me where I liked the idea of collecting, but I didn't really have any interest in the topic. And then once I got out of that, I got out of that. And I don't give a crap about hockey cards today. I looked at them all recently. I went online and took a look, and they are worth nothing. Absolutely nothing. Hockey cards from the late 1980s and the early 90s, there was such a glut in the market that everybody has them. So they're worth pennies, which I find really, really funny. Because there's all those stories about my mother threw out my hockey card collection. Now it would be worth $20,000. And mine is like worth, I don't know, $100 max. And I have so many cards. Anyway, so that's mine. Neal, have you thought about one for yourself?
I think so. I mean, I can actually relate to both of yours because, like Ben, I certainly do not watch anime to the extent I did, like, say, when I was in college. And I can relate to yours, Jono, in that I used to be big into collecting, like, basketball cards, and now I'm just like, nope, not anymore. Speaking of, during like my older childhood, like my middle school years and all, because my best friend was super into at the time was super into basketball and a big Knicks fan. I kind of became a New York Knicks fan as well and followed them like crazy. He and I even, went to a Knicks game at Madison Square Garden and everything. But nowadays, and then after high school, I was just like, I stopped being into NBA basketball and even like, the major professional sports like NFL football or MLB baseball or anything like that. Like, I casually like check the highlights because I live in an area of the country that's obsessed with the Philadelphia Eagles, so just so I know what's going on. But
it's good for small talk, yeah.
But yeah, the only times I'm glued to the TV for sports is the men's and women's World Cup.
I really want to thank you both for coming on the show today and talking about these games. I feel like both of them, WrestleQuest is on a few people's radars. I don't think 24 Killers is on many people's radars. So I like the idea of putting a little bit more out there. So people who are listening to this, maybe you thought, hey, this sounds pretty cool. Check these games out. I think that also check out the reviews on the site because they're, well, actually, I can't speak to Neal's review, but all of Neal's reviews are very well written. So I suspect this one will be as well. And if not, Neal, I'm gonna have to hit you with a metal chair, hit you with a metal folding chair. That's going to be your punishment for dropping the ball on the WrestleQuest review.
Nah, the bitter gourd is not going to let that happen.
No, based on the intro, I don't think he will. Anyway, again, thank you. So, anyone out there, if you're looking to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened up a store, and you can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. We sell lots of things in there. If you want to show off your RPG Fan colors, it's a fantastic place to do so. We have t-shirts. We have, like I keep mentioning in every episode, baby onesies, just because they're so darn funny. And, magnets, stuff like that, and mugs. So check that out. You can also check out our past episodes of Random Encounter if you are looking for something to listen to. I know we talked about Moon a few years ago, probably in 2020. So if you feel like revisiting that dark time, please check out those episodes. And by revisiting that dark time, I mean the time when Greg hosted the podcast. No, I'm kidding, Greg. Actually, it's going to be cool. Greg might be coming to Toronto in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. So I'm actually really excited because I've never actually met Greg in person. And we've spent so much time hanging out and talking together on Random Encounter and hosting it together that I'm really, really excited to get a chance to meet him in person. Anyway, so yeah, if you want to support us, listen to some past of Random Encounter. We also have 2 other podcasts at the show. We have Retro Encounter, and last week we had our latest Final Fantasy Draft episode. I think it was 2.0. It is a long episode, and it is a deservingly long episode. As I understand it, originally it was like 3 hours plus, and then Zach edited it down to a much more reasonable amount. So if you enjoy the Final Fantasy series, it's going to be well worth a listen. It's a great episode. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans' music podcast. Our last episode was an interview that Patrick and Hillary did with Cara Comparetto, and Cara has a YouTube channel where she releases basically piano and other instrumental covers of video game music, RPGs primarily, and she just released a Chrono Trigger album that is arranged for piano, pipe organ, and harpsichord, and she does cosplay. She has the videos, they're all on YouTube. She has the album out now, and the videos, she's cosplaying as Chrono Trigger characters in them. And they're absolutely incredible videos. She just released the one for World Revolution, and it's so damn good. So check those out on YouTube, and absolutely check out the episode. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for future episode topics or discussion questions, please fire me off a message. If you'd like to send me an email personally, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. You can find me at Mastodon at jonologan@mastodon.social, or you can find me at Jono Logan on Threads. I'm not super involved in Threads yet, but seems to be the heir presumptive right now for Twitter, so I figured that I better lock down that username. And I am not the only person on this episode who has a social media presence. Neal, where can we find you online? Bitter Gourd, where can we find you online?
Well, I don't know about the Bitter Gourd, but you can email me at nealch@rpgfan.com. That's NEALCH. Or you can find me NealCH RPG Fan on Discord.
You can find the Bitter Gourd in the ring. That's where you can find the Bitter Gourd. And Ben, where can we find you online?
Yeah, so you can email me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
Oh, you're also related to Brink.
Yeah. Hey, the entire Logan family runs wrestling promotion in the game, so...
That's really funny. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. You'd help us get the word out there, and you can rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Again, Neal, Ben, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really, really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your time playing through these games.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure. And to everyone out there listening, remember, whatever you're playing, have fun.